Derek Thompson stood in his daughter's empty bedroom with tears rolling down his face. The pink walls that once echoed with 7-year-old Zoe's laughter now felt like a prison of silence. His hands shook as he held the eviction notice that gave him 30 days to find $8,000 or lose everything. His job at the warehouse barely covered food and Zoe's school supplies. His ex-wife had left them 2 years ago without a word and never sent a single dollar. Derek was drowning, and he knew it. He looked at his phone and saw a text from his boss saying his hours were being cut next month. That's when he made a decision that would change his life forever. He would rent out Zoe's room to a college student and sleep on the couch himself. His baby girl would never know how close they came to living in their car. The next morning, Derek posted an ad online for a room rental. He priced it cheap because he needed someone fast. Within hours, his phone buzzed with a message from someone named Riley. Chun. She said she was a college student looking for a quiet place to study and could move in immediately. Derek felt a wave of relief wash over his tired body. He texted back and they agreed to meet that evening. When the doorbell rang, Derek opened it and stood frozen. Before him stood a young white woman with blonde hair pulled into a messy bun, wearing faded jeans and a college sweatshirt with holes in it. She carried 2 old suitcases that looked like they had seen better days. Her green eyes were kind but sad. Something about her reminded Derek of himself. She looked like someone running from something. Riley extended her hand and smiled softly. Derek let her in and showed her the small bedroom. It had a twin bed, a desk, and a small closet. Nothing fancy, but it was clean. Riley's eyes filled with tears as she looked around the room. Derek felt awkward and asked if something was wrong. Riley shook her head quickly and said it was perfect. She said she had been staying in her car for the past week, and this felt like a palace. Derek felt his heart break a little. Here was this young woman struggling just like him. He told her the rent was $400 a month and she could move in today. Riley handed him cash right there. $800. 2 months up front. Derek tried to give back the extra month, but Riley insisted. She said she wanted to make sure she had a place to stay. Something in her voice told Derek she was telling the truth. That first week was quiet. Riley left early for classes and came home late. She kept to herself and was always polite. Derek noticed she ate very little. Sometimes he would hear her crying softly in her room late at night. One evening, Derek was making spaghetti for himself and Zoe, who was visiting for the weekend. He made extra and knocked on Riley's door. She opened it with red, puffy eyes. Derek pretended not to notice and simply said he made too much food and would she like some. Riley's face lit up like Christmas morning. She joined them at the small kitchen table. Zoe immediately loved Riley and talked her ear off about school and her friends. Riley listened to every word like it was the most important thing in the world. Derek watched them and felt something warm grow in his chest. Something he had not felt in years. After that night, Riley became part of their little family. She helped Zoe with homework. She cleaned the apartment without being asked. She bought groceries and always said they were on sale, even though Derek suspected she was spending her own money. Derek found himself looking forward to coming home. Not because of the apartment, but because of Riley. They would sit on the couch after Zoe went to bed and talk for hours. Riley told him she was studying business at the local community college. She said her family did not support her dreams, and she was doing this alone. Derek shared his own struggles about being a single dad and how scared he was of failing. Riley looked him in the eyes and said Zoe was lucky to have him. No one had said that to Derek in years. He felt seen for the first time in forever. 3 months passed and Derek noticed changes in himself. He smiled more. He laughed at Riley's terrible jokes. He started looking forward to tomorrow instead of dreading it. Zoe asked him one day if Riley could be her new mommy. Derek felt panic and joy crash into each other in his heart. He explained to Zoe that Riley was just their friend and roommate. But that night as he lay on the couch, he could not stop thinking about Riley, the way she hummed while washing dishes, the way she left little notes of encouragement on his coffee mug, the way his heart raced when their hands accidentally touched. Derek realized with stunning clarity that he was falling in love with her. But he pushed the feeling down. Riley was 22 and full of potential. He was a 30-year-old single dad with nothing to offer. She deserved better than his broken life. Then everything changed on a random Tuesday evening. Derek came home from work exhausted and found Riley sitting at the kitchen table crying. Not soft tears, but deep sobs that shook her whole body. Derek rushed to her side and asked what happened. Riley looked up at him with devastated eyes and said her car had been towed and she did not have the money to get it back. She needed $600 by Friday or she would lose it forever. Everything she owned was in that car. Her laptop for school, her mom's necklace, everything. Derek felt his chest tighten. He had exactly $640 in his savings account. Money he was saving for Zoe's birthday next month. He looked at Riley's broken face and made his decision in a heartbeat. He told Riley to dry her tears. He would get her car back. Riley grabbed his hands and said she could not let him do that. Derek squeezed her hands back and said family helps family. Riley's eyes went wide at the word family. The next morning Derek withdrew the money and went with Riley to get her car. She cried the whole drive there. She kept saying she would pay him back. Derek told her there was no rush. When they got to the impound lot, Derek paid the fees and waited while Riley got her car. But as they were leaving, the lot manager came running out yelling. He said there was a problem with Riley's identification. Her name on the ID did not match the car registration. The registration had a different last name. Riley's face went white. Derek felt confused. The manager looked at his computer screen and his eyes went huge. He looked at Riley and whispered a name. Catherine Harrington. Derek felt the world tilt. Catherine Harrington was the daughter of billionaire business mogul James Harrington. Her face had been all over the news 6 months ago when she ran away from her family. The manager asked if she was that Catherine Harrington. Riley looked at Derek with tears streaming down her face and nodded yes. Derek felt like he could not breathe. Riley was a billionaire's daughter. She had been lying to him for months. Everything she told him was a lie. He stumbled backwards and Riley reached for him, but he pulled away. He left the impound lot and drove home in silence. Riley followed in her car. When they got to the apartment, Derek went straight to his room and closed the door. He heard Riley in the living room crying, but he could not face her. His mind was spinning with questions and anger and hurt. Why had she lied? Why had she pretended to be poor? Why had she made him fall in love with a ghost? That night Derek could not sleep. He heard Riley packing her things. The sound of zippers and drawers opening and closing. At 3 a.m, his door creaked open. Riley stood there in the darkness with tears on her face. She asked if she could explain. Derek said nothing, but he did not tell her to leave. Riley sat on the edge of his bed and began to speak. Her voice was raw and broken. She told him everything. How her father, James Harrington, had controlled every aspect of her life since birth. How he chose her friends, her clothes, her school, her future. How he wanted her to marry a man she did not love to merge 2 business empires. How she felt like a prisoner in a golden cage. How 6 months ago she had run away with nothing but her car and some cash. How she had been surviving on the streets, trying to figure out who she really was without her father's money and power. How she had found Derek's ad and thought it was a sign from God. How for the first time in her life she felt real and free and happy. How she had fallen in love with him and Zoe and this little broken apartment. How she was terrified that if she told the truth, He would treat her differently, or worse, kick her out. Her voice cracked as she said the last few months living with him had been the happiest of her entire life. She said she understood if he hated her. She said she would leave in the morning and never bother him again. Derek sat in silence, processing everything. His anger melted away as he looked at Riley's face. She was not a liar. She was a scared young woman trying to escape a prison he could not imagine. He thought about his own life, how he had been judged and dismissed and looked down on because of his circumstances, how people saw a poor single black dad and assumed the worst, how much that hurt. He realized Riley had experienced the opposite. People only saw her money and never saw her. She wanted someone to see her for who she really was. And Derek had done that. He had seen her heart, her kindness, her strength. The money did not change who she was inside. Derek reached out and took Riley's hand. He told her he did not hate her. He understood why she lied. He said she could stay as long as she wanted. Riley collapsed into his arms, sobbing with relief. Derek held her close and felt his own tears fall. He whispered that he loved her. Riley pulled back and looked at him with wide eyes. She said she loved him too. They sat in the darkness holding each other as the sun began to rise. The next few days were different. There were no more secrets between them. Riley told Derek everything about her life. The pressure, the loneliness, the constant fear of disappointing her father. Derek listened and shared his own fears about failing Zoe. They talked about their dreams. Riley said she wanted to finish school and start her own nonprofit to help homeless women. Derek said he wanted to go back to school and become a teacher. They made plans together. Small plans. Real plans. Plans that had nothing to do with money. But reality came crashing back on Friday afternoon. Derek came home to find 3 black cars parked outside his apartment building. Men in expensive suits stood by the entrance. Derek's stomach dropped. He ran upstairs and found Riley standing in the living room, facing a tall, older white man in a tailored suit. James Harrington had found his daughter. The tension in the room was suffocating. James looked at Derek like he was dirt on his shoe. He demanded Riley come home immediately. Riley stood her ground and said no. She was an adult and could make her own choices. James laughed coldly. He said she was living in a fantasy world. He looked around the small apartment with disgust. He asked Riley if this was really what she wanted. A life of poverty with a man who could barely take care of his own child. Derek felt rage burn in his chest, but he stayed quiet. Riley stepped forward, and her voice was steel. She told her father that Derek had more integrity and kindness in his little finger than James had in his entire body. She said Derek had shown her what real love looked like. Not control or manipulation, but sacrifice and respect. She said she would rather live in this small apartment with Derek and Zoe than in a mansion alone. James's face turned red. He said if Riley did not come home, she was cut off completely. No money, no trust fund, no inheritance, nothing. He said she would regret this choice. Riley looked him straight in the eye and said the only thing she regretted was not leaving sooner. James Harrington left in a fury. The apartment felt cold after he was gone. Riley collapsed on the couch, shaking. Derek sat beside her and pulled her close. He asked if she was okay. Riley nodded, but her eyes were far away. She whispered that she just lost her entire family and everything she had ever known. Derek kissed her forehead and said she gained something better. A family that chose her. That night the 3 of them, Derek and Riley and little Zoe, made dinner together. They laughed and told stories. Zoe asked Riley if she was going to stay forever. Riley looked at Derek with love in her eyes and said if he would have her. Derek said there was nothing he wanted more. They were a family now. Not perfect, but real. That was all that mattered. The following weeks were hard. Riley enrolled back in school full-time. She got a job at a coffee shop to pay her way. Derek watched her work twice as hard as anyone he knew. She never complained. She never looked back. But Derek saw the tiredness in her eyes. He saw her eating crackers for dinner to save money. He saw her studying until 3 in the morning. He felt helpless. His own financial situation was still terrible. The eviction notice had been temporarily solved by Riley's rent, but he was still drowning in debt. One night Derek made a decision. He would sell his truck. It was the only thing of value he owned. His dad had given it to him before he passed away. It meant everything to Derek, but Riley meant more. He listed the truck online and sold it within 2 days for $3,000. He used half to pay off immediate debts and gave the other half to Riley for school expenses. Riley cried and said she could not take it. Derek said it was not about taking. It was about building something together. Every sacrifice was an investment in their future. Winter came hard that year. The heating in their building was broken more often than it worked. Derek would wake up some mornings and see his breath in the air. He worried about Zoe getting sick during her weekend visits. He worried about Riley walking to her early morning shifts in the freezing cold. Money was tighter than ever. Derek had picked up a second job working night security at a hospital, but it still was not enough. Some nights he went to bed hungry so Riley and Zoe could eat. He never told them. He just said he had eaten at work. Riley knew, though. She always knew. One evening Derek came home to find Riley had used her employee discount to bring home sandwiches from the coffee shop. She said her manager was throwing them out anyway. Derek knew she had probably paid for them herself, but he was too tired and hungry to argue. They sat together eating stale sandwiches, and Derek thought he had never tasted anything better. Despite the struggles, Derek found moments of pure joy. Like the time Riley taught Zoe how to make paper snowflakes, and they covered the entire apartment with them. Or when Derek came home early one day and found Riley dancing in the kitchen, to music only she could hear. She had been so embarrassed, but Derek had taken her hand and danced with her right there. They had laughed until their sides hurt. Or the time Zoe had drawn a picture of the 3 of them holding hands with a big heart around them. She had labeled it "My Real Family." Derek had cried when he saw it. These moments reminded him why he was fighting so hard. This little family was worth every struggle. One night Derek was working his security shift when he got a call from Riley. Her voice was shaking. She said Zoe had a fever and it was getting worse. Derek's ex had dropped Zoe off unexpectedly that evening, and now she would not answer her phone. Derek felt panic rise in his throat. He told his supervisor there was a family emergency and ran to his car. He drove home breaking every speed limit. When he burst through the door, he found Riley holding Zoe in her lap. Zoe was burning up and barely conscious. Derek scooped up his daughter, and they rushed to the emergency room. The next few hours were a nightmare. Zoe had a severe infection. The doctor said if they had waited even a few more hours, it could have been much worse. Derek sat in that hospital chair holding his little girl's hand and sobbing. Riley was there beside him the whole time. She held him when he broke down. She talked to the nurses and doctors. She made sure Derek ate something from the cafeteria. She was his rock. When Zoe finally stabilized and fell asleep, Derek pulled Riley into the hallway. He held her face in his hands and told her she had saved his daughter's life. If Riley had not been there, he did not know what would have happened. Riley cried and said that's what family does. They show up. Derek kissed her right there in that hospital hallway. He kissed her like she was his oxygen. When they pulled apart, Derek made a decision. He was done hiding his feelings. He was done pretending this was casual. He told Riley that he wanted to build a real life with her. He wanted to make this official. He wanted her to be Zoe's mom in every way that mattered. Riley cried and said yes. She said she had been his from the moment he shared his spaghetti with her. They held each other as nurses walked by and machines beeped, and the world kept spinning. In that moment, everything else faded away. It was just them. Just love. Just hope. Zoe had to stay in the hospital for 3 days. Derek could not afford to miss that much work, but his supervisor had fired him for leaving his shift. Derek felt the weight of failure crush him again. No job meant no rent money. No rent money meant they were back to square one. He sat in the hospital cafeteria with his head in his hands wondering how he was going to tell Riley, but when he went back to Zoe's room, he found Riley on the phone. She was speaking in a tone he had never heard before, firm, professional, powerful. She hung up and turned to Derek. She said she had made some calls to people she used to know, people who owed her family favors. She had gotten Derek a job interview at a company downtown. Better pay, better hours, benefits. Derek felt overwhelmed. He asked how she had done that. Riley smiled sadly and said her old life was good for something after all. Derek wanted to be proud, but part of him felt small. He was supposed to be taking care of her, not the other way around. Riley must have seen it on his face. She took his hands and told him to stop. She said relationships were not about one person carrying everything. They were about two people holding each other up. She said Derek had given her a home when she had nothing. He had shown her unconditional love. He had made her feel human again. This was just her turn to help. Derek felt his eyes burn with tears. He realized his pride had been getting in the way. Love was not about being the hero. It was about being a team. He thanked Riley and kissed her softly. She whispered that they were in this together, always. 4 months passed and their little family grew stronger. Zoe blossomed with Riley's love and attention. Her grades improved. She smiled constantly. Derek started his new job and it was everything Riley had promised. His boss was fair. The work was steady. He could finally breathe a little. He and Riley talked about the future often. Marriage, more kids, a house someday. Dreams that felt impossible before now felt within reach. Then one afternoon Derek came home to find Riley sitting on the couch holding an envelope. Her hands were shaking. Derek sat down and asked what was wrong. Riley opened the envelope and pulled out a check. Derek's eyes nearly fell out of his head. It was made out to Riley for $20 million. A note was attached in elegant handwriting. It was from Riley's grandmother who had passed away 2 years ago. The will had finally cleared probate. Riley's grandmother had left her a fortune independent of her father. Money that James could not touch or control. Riley looked at Derek with tears streaming down her face and asked what they should do. Derek felt 1,000 emotions hit him at once. Relief, fear, joy, inadequacy. This money changed everything. Riley could do anything now. Go anywhere. Be with anyone. Why would she stay with a broke single dad in a tiny apartment? Riley seemed to read his thoughts. She grabbed his face and made him look at her. She said the money changed nothing about how she felt. She loved him when she thought she had nothing, and she loved him now. The money was just paper. Derek was her home. Derek felt tears fall down his cheeks. He pulled Riley into his arms and held her like she might disappear. He told her he loved her more than life itself. Riley whispered that she had an idea. Something that could change both their lives and honor what her grandmother would have wanted. She said she wanted to use the money to start a foundation. A foundation that helped single parents get back on their feet. Job training, childcare, housing assistance. Everything Derek had needed, but never had. And she wanted Derek to run it with her. Derek felt his heart stop. Riley was offering him more than money. She was offering him purpose. A chance to help people like himself. to make sure no other parent had to choose between feeding their kid and keeping a roof over their head. He looked at Riley and saw not a billionaire's daughter but his partner, his equal, his future. He said yes. Over the next year, their lives transformed in ways they could never have imagined. Riley finished her degree with honors. Derek enrolled in night school to get his teaching certificate. Together, they launched the Harrington Thompson Foundation. They bought a building in the neighborhood where Derek grew up and turned it into a community center. They hired staff who had lived through poverty themselves. They helped hundreds of families find stable housing and good jobs. The foundation became Riley's passion and Derek's purpose. But through it all, they stayed grounded. They still lived in the same small apartment. They still made spaghetti dinners. They still tucked Zoe in every night together. The money had not changed who they were. It had only amplified their ability to love. 2 years after Riley moved in, Derek took her and Zoe to the park where he used to take Zoe as a baby. The same park where he had cried on a bench, wondering how he would survive another day. He held Riley's hand as they walked. Zoe ran ahead chasing butterflies. When they reached the bench, Derek got down on one knee. Riley gasped and covered her mouth. Derek pulled out a simple ring he had bought with his own money from his new job. Nothing fancy, but it was his. He told Riley that she had saved his life in every way a person could be saved. She had given him love and hope and a future. She had shown him that family was not about blood or money, but about choice. He said he wanted to choose her every day for the rest of his life. He asked her to marry him. Riley fell to her knees crying and said yes 1,000 times yes. Zoe ran over screaming with joy. They held each other on that bench, surrounded by the sounds of the park. 3 people who had been broken and lost had found each other and become whole. Their wedding was small and perfect. Just close friends and the families from the foundation. No fancy venue or expensive decorations. They got married in the community center they had built together. Derek wore a simple black suit. Riley wore a white dress she found at a thrift store. Zoe was the flower girl and took her job very seriously. As they exchanged vows, Derek thought about that night 2 years ago when he stood in Zoe's empty room crying and broken. He thought about how close he had come to giving up. How he had posted that ad out of desperation. How Riley had shown up at his door like an answer to a prayer he had not even spoken. He realized that sometimes God sends help in the most unexpected packages. Sometimes salvation looks like a struggling college girl with 2 old suitcases and a heart full of hope. As Derek kissed his wife for the first time, the room erupted in cheers. Zoe hugged them both tight. Derek looked out at the crowd and saw faces of people they had helped. Single moms who now had stable jobs. Dads who had roofs over their kids' heads. Families who had been given a second chance just like he had. This was their legacy. Not money or power, but love multiplied. Riley squeezed his hand and whispered that she loved him. Derek whispered back that she was his miracle. They danced together as husband and wife surrounded by their community. The reception lasted late into the night. Derek watched Riley dance with Zoe and felt his heart might burst. Later that evening, Derek's mother showed up. She had not spoken to him in over a year after he had refused to give her money for her gambling problem. She stood in the doorway looking older and tired. Riley saw her first and squeezed Derek's hand. She told him this was his choice. No pressure either way. Derek walked over to his mother. She started to speak, but Derek held up his hand. He told her he loved her, but he could not have toxic people in his life anymore. Not when he had a daughter and wife to protect. His mother's face crumpled. She said she understood. She said she was proud of him. She said she was getting help and wanted to be in his life again someday, if he would let her. Derek felt old wounds ache in his chest. He told his mother he hoped she got the help she needed. Maybe someday they could try again. But not today. His mother nodded and left quietly. Riley appeared at his side and held him as he cried. She told him she was proud of him for setting boundaries. Derek realized that healing was not just about finding love. It was also about learning when to walk away from hurt. As the night wound down, Derek and Riley stood outside the community center, looking up at the stars. Zoe was inside sleeping on a pile of coats. Riley leaned her head on Derek's shoulder and sighed with contentment. Derek asked her if she ever regretted giving up her old life. Riley was quiet for a moment. Then she said she did not regret it. She said her old life was not really living. It was existing in a pretty prison. This life with Derek and Zoe was messy and hard and real, and she would not trade it for anything. Derek turned to face her. He told her she was the bravest person he had ever met. She had given up everything to find herself. Most people never have that kind of courage. Riley smiled and said Derek had given up his pride to accept help and love. That took courage too. They kissed under the stars as sirens wailed in the distance, and the city hummed with life around them. The years that followed brought both joy and challenges. Riley gave birth to twin boys 2 years after the wedding. Derek finished his teaching degree and got a job at the local elementary school. Zoe grew into a confident teenager who volunteered at the foundation on weekends. The foundation expanded to 3 cities and helped thousands of families. But it was not always easy. Derek struggled with feeling like he was not doing enough. Riley dealt with anxiety and panic attacks from her traumatic past. They went to counseling together and learned how to communicate better. They learned that love was not about never fighting. It was about always coming back to each other. It was about choosing each other every single day, even when it was hard. One day, Derek was teaching his 4th grade class when the principal called him to the office. His heart raced, thinking something had happened to one of his kids. But when he got there, he found Riley waiting with a huge smile. She was holding a newspaper. The headline read Local Foundation named Nonprofit of the Year. They had won a national award for their work. Derek felt pride swell in his chest. Not because of the award, but because of what it represented. Proof that love and hard work could change the world. Riley kissed him and said she could not have done any of it without him. Derek said the same thing back to her. Because it was true, they were better together. That night they gathered their whole family around the dinner table. Zoe was 16 now and beautiful. The twins were 4 and wild and perfect. Derek looked around the table at the faces of the people he loved most and felt overwhelming gratitude. He thought about the man he had been 3 years ago, broken, desperate, ready to give up. And he thought about the man he was now. Husband, father, teacher, advocate, healer. Riley had not just saved his life. She had helped him become the man he was always meant to be, and he had done the same for her. They had saved each other. That was the real miracle. Derek stood up and raised his glass of water. He said he wanted to make a toast. He looked at Riley and said she was his answered prayer. He looked at Zoe and said she was his reason for breathing. He looked at the twins and said they were his future. He said family was not about blood or money or what you looked like. Family was about showing up, about sacrifice, about choosing love even when it was hard. He said he was the luckiest man alive. Riley stood and wrapped her arms around him. Zoe and the twins joined in. They stood there in their little dining room holding each other as dinner got cold. 5 people who loved each other with everything they had. 5 people who proved that sometimes the best things in life come from the hardest moments. 5 people who were living proof that love always wins. 2 broken people had found each other in the darkness and had built something beautiful in the light. Their story was proof that love sees no color or class. That kindness is the greatest currency. That sometimes the person who saves you is the one you thought you were saving. Derek held Riley close and knew with absolute certainty that every hard moment, every tear, every struggle had led him exactly where he was meant to be. Home,